Imagine if everything you thought you knew about ancient history, the Roman Empire, ancient Egypt, was just fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, not just a little bit off, but like misdated by thousands of years.
Right, potentially folding entire civilizations into a much, much more recent past. And what if math and astronomy could actually, well, prove it?
That's the really audacious claim we're plunging into today. Our mission on this deep dive is to unpack this pretty extraordinary theory known as the new chronology.
Okay.
It's mainly championed by an eminent Russian mathematician, Anatoly Fomenko, and his colleagues.
Yeah.
And it's a concept so unorthodox, so revolutionary, that it's been labeled, heretical by pretty much every mainstream scholar out there.
Yeah, heretical sounds about right. This isn't just some minor historical debate, is it? It sounds like a full-blown intellectual battleground.
It really is.
So we'll explore the core arguments, look at the surprising astronomical data it presents, and crucially also cover the very strong criticisms it faces from the wider academic community.
Exactly. We want you to get a deeper understanding of this fascinating intellectual clash without getting totally bogged down in, information overload.
And where are we drawing this from? What's the source material here?
So our sources for this deep dive come heavily from Fomenko's own book, Astronomy versus History. It's actually the second volume in his big series called History, Fiction, or Science.
Okay.
And of course, we're also looking at various critical analyses that have popped up in response to his work over the years.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The architect of this whole paradigm shift is Anatoly Fomenko. And he's not just some lone historian with a wild idea, right? His background is pretty serious.
Oh, absolutely. He's a full member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, a doctor of physics and mathematics, a specialist in geometry and topology.
Right. That's a pretty heavy scientific background to bring to what seems like a historical debate.
It really is. And his work, alongside his colleagues, apparently began as what he calls an unbelievable byproduct of something completely different: space exploration, actually.
Space exploration, how does that connect?
Well, it stemmed from this strange phenomenon observed by a NASA scientist, Robert Newton, something weird in lunar mechanics. That was kind of the first thread they started pulling.
Huh. Okay, but before we dive into that specific cosmic anomaly, let's just hit everyone with a really radical claim up front.
Let's do it.
The new chronology basically asserts that the traditional timeline of Middle Eastern and European history is deeply, fundamentally flawed, like completely broken.
Yeah, it claims that recorded human history only truly goes back to around 800 AD.
Only 800 AD.
Yeah, and that most of the historical events we know about actually occurred much later, between roughly 1000 and 1500 AD.
So what does that mean for places like ancient Greece, Rome, Egypt?
Well, Fomenko suggests that the events we think happened then aren't truly distinct ancient events at all. They're more like historical echoes, phantom reflections, he calls them.
Phantom reflection.
Yeah, like distorted reflections of actual events that took place much, much later in the medieval period.
Yeah.
So essentially, if you thought you were reading about, say, Julius Caesar, you might actually be reading a disguised account of, Charlemagne, just shifted back in time.
Wow. Okay, that is a pretty mind-bending concept.
It really is.
And this is where the theory takes a truly radical turn, isn't it? Challenging our most fundamental understanding of historical figures.
Oh, definitely. For instance, the theory suggests Jesus Christ wasn't born around 1 AD. He suggests Jesus was born in 1152 AD.
1152.
Yes, and crucified in 1185 AD. And get this, the First Crusade becomes an immediate reaction to his crucifixion, not something centuries later.
Okay, that rewrites a lot, and it doesn't stop there.
Nope. The theory also re-identifies Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, as a 13th century AD poet.
13th century.
Yeah, and suggests the events of the Iliad, the Trojan War, actually correspond to the fall of the Latin Empire of Constantinople in 1261 AD.
These are claims that just fly in the face of millennia of established scholarship.
Absolutely stunning, unorthodox claims. It's a lot to take in, these huge redatings.
It really is. But for Fomenko, this wasn't just a hunch, right? You mentioned it started with something specific, an anomaly. That was the smoking gun.
Exactly. It wasn't just abstract theorizing. It all began with Robert Newton's mysterious leap. So imagine you're charting the moon's movement over thousands of years.
Okay.
It's not perfectly smooth, right? There are tiny, predictable wobbles and changes in its speed. D double prime, or D, is this highly precise
acceleration parameter.
Precisely. And Robert Newton, who was an eminent American astronomer, discovered this drastic drop, or sudden leap, in the calculated values of D when he was working backwards using ancient eclipse descriptions,
A leap where?
specifically between about 700 AD and 1300 AD.
And this leap couldn't be explained by modern physics.
Correct. He noted it cannot be explained by modern geophysical theories. It was so baffling, it even led him to suggest maybe non-gravitational forces were involved.
Wow, that's a pretty big unknown for a scientist to point to.
It is. So Fomenko jumps on this. He argues that this inexplicable behavior of D double prime is actually a direct result of misdated ancient eclipses.
How so?
His claim is, if you take those eclipses that are traditionally placed in antiquity and redate them to the Middle Ages, that mysterious leap in D double prime just vanishes.
It disappears.
Completely. And the parameter then shows only these tiny constant fluctuations, which lines up perfectly with its modern observed value.
Okay, that is a compelling argument if the math holds up, but it raises another question. How reliable were eclipse predictions back in ancient times?
That's a really important point. It's crucial to understand that predicting solar eclipses accurately is incredibly difficult, even if you know about cycles like the Saros cycle.
Right.
Really accurate prediction only became possible with very advanced theories of lunar motion, which didn't come about until, as Fomenko puts it, 100 years after Copernicus. So we're talking the 16th, maybe 17th centuries.
Okay, so that immediately makes you look sideways at any reports of precise eclipse predictions from before the 16th century found in old chronicles.
Exactly. It casts doubt on their reliability, or at least on the dating assigned to them.
Let's look at a concrete example of this chronological conflict you mentioned, the Thucydides Triad.
Yes, this is a classic case study Fomenko uses. So you have the ancient Greek historian Thucydides, traditionally dated to the 5th century BC.
Right, History of the Peloponnesian War, standard text.
Standard text. In it, he describes 3 eclipses, 2 solar and 1 lunar.
Okay, what's the problem?
The major problem centers on the very first solar eclipse he describes, traditionally dated August 3rd, 431 BC. Astronomical calculations show pretty clearly this was an annular eclipse.
Annular meaning the moon doesn't quite cover the whole sun, leaving a ring of fire.
Exactly. It couldn't have been total anywhere on Earth. Yet, Thucydides explicitly states several stars appeared.
And stars only appear during a total eclipse when it gets dark enough.
Precisely. So you have this blatant contradiction that really vexed astronomers and chronologers for centuries.
How did they try to explain it away?
Well, they tried to force a fit. Johannes Kepler, for example, apparently mistakenly claimed it was total. Others, like a scholar named Hoffman, even suggested Thucydides' mention of stars was just, rhetorical embellishment.
The old he didn't really mean it argument.
Basically, yeah. Anything to make it fit the established 431 BC date.
So what's the new chronology solution here?
Well, Fomenko highlights work by N.A. Morozov, another researcher, when they expanded the search for matching eclipse patterns beyond antiquity and looked into the Middle Ages.
They found a match.
They found 2 precise potential solutions, and the one that fit the historical context best placed those 3 eclipses. The 2 solar, 1 lunar, described by Thucydides, smack bang in the 12th century AD.
12th century, what are the dates?
August 2nd, 1133 AD. That was a total solar eclipse explaining the stars. Then March 20th, 1140 AD, another solar one, which calculations show was partial in the relevant region, matching Thucydides' description of the second one. And finally, August 28th, 1151 AD, for the lunar eclipse.
And this 12th century solution aligns with all the details Thucydides gave. The stars, the partial nature of the second one.
According to Morozov and Fomenko, yes. It aligns perfectly with all the astronomical details mentioned in the text.
The implication there is just huge. If that redating is correct,
Then Thucydides could not possibly have written his work earlier than the 11th century AD, at least not the version containing those eclipse descriptions.
which shifts a cornerstone of Greek history by over 1,500 years.
Exactly. And this redating, if it's true, doesn't just shift one historian. It fundamentally challenges how we've interpreted literary and historical sources for centuries.
It makes you ask, how much of what we assume about ancient intellectual life is built on a potentially flawed chronological foundation?
What other facts might start to unravel if the dates are fundamentally wrong? It's a cascade effect.
Okay, that brings us neatly to another really fascinating area of Fomenko's research, horoscopes.
Right. Not something most historians put much stock in today. But back in the Middle Ages, particularly between the 15th and 17th centuries, astrology was a dominant cosmological discipline.
So horoscopes, representing the positions of planets and zodiac constellations, weren't just mystical charts. They were used practically.
Oh, absolutely. They were often used to record important dates, sometimes even carved onto gravestones, as a kind of permanent record of a birth or death time.
Okay, so potentially valuable astronomical records. But the new chronology claims there's a problem with how they've been used for dating. A vicious circle.
Yes, Fomenko argues there's a vicious circle of dating. Can I explain what he means by that?
Please do.
Okay, think of it like this. Imagine you're building a jigsaw puzzle, and you've decided a certain piece must go in a certain spot based on, say, tradition.
Yeah.
You might then try to force other pieces to fit around it, even if they don't quite belong naturally. And once they're jammed in, you point to them as proof that your initial piece was in the right place all along.
Ah, I see. Self-confirming.
Exactly. Fomenko alleges that's what happened with historical dating and astronomical data. He claims 17th to 19th century astronomers, heavily influenced by the already established traditional timeline, what he calls the Scaligerine chronology, after Joseph Scaliger.
Okay.
They were under pressure to make things fit. So if they couldn't find an exact astronomical match for a horoscope description in the required ancient period, they wouldn't question the history. They'd question the ancient document, or maybe tweak the interpretation.
Or worse.
Or, he claims, they might even use modern calculations to create plausible-sounding ancient planetary positions, insert those into chronicles as if they were ancient observations, and then later use that very data to prove the ancient dates were correct.
So essentially manufacturing evidence to confirm their own pre-existing timeline.
That's the accusation, yes. That's the vicious circle.
And to break out of that, Fomenko prioritizes horoscopes carved in stone like on temple walls or coffins over ones found in manuscripts.
Yes, precisely. His argument is simple. Stone carvings are much harder to forge, alter, or tamper with later compared to a manuscript page.
Makes sense. More durable evidence. So what's a prime example of this? You mentioned the Dendera Zodiacs earlier.
Yes, the Dendera Zodiacs. These are really famous, beautiful stone bas-reliefs found in the Dendera temple complex in Egypt. There's a round zodiac and a long zodiac, and both clearly depict detailed horoscopes.
And mainstream historians date these to when?
Usually the 1st century BC or AD, during the Greco-Roman period in Egypt.
Okay. But there were issues finding astronomical matches in antiquity.
Big issues. Despite many attempts by prominent 19th and 20th century astronomers, people like Laplace and Fourier tried, no one found a really satisfactory ancient astronomical solution that matched all the planetary positions depicted.
So what did they conclude?
Well, it led some to hypothesize that maybe they weren't meant to be precise records at all. Maybe they were just symbolic or, purely fantasy depictions.
Right. But Fomenko claims he found a solution.
He does. He claims his team conducted an unprejudiced astronomical dating, using exhaustive computer searches that considered all possible interpretations of the symbols without being tied to the traditional date.
And the result?
They found precise, unique solutions, but not in antiquity. They found them in the Middle Ages.
Middle Ages. When exactly?
The round zodiac is dated quite precisely to the morning of March 20th, 1185 AD, and the long zodiac to a period between April 22nd and 26th, 1168 AD.
Again, shifting things by over 1,000 years.
Over a millennium, yes.
Now, you mentioned this gets controversial. There was a specific refutation attempt.
Yes, Fomenko gets quite pointed here. He specifically calls out two mainstream historians, E.S. Golubtsova and Y.A. Zavenian. They apparently published work claiming to refute an earlier medieval dating of the round zodiac, proposed by Morozov, using computers.
Okay, using computers seems like a solid approach. What's Fomenko's issue?
Fomenko alleges they essentially rigged the test. He claims they falsified the initial data that they fed into their computer program
How?
by deliberately omitting the constellation of Aries from their search parameters. Since the medieval solution requires certain planets to be in Aries, removing Aries from the search universe basically guaranteed their computer couldn't find the medieval solution.
That's a very serious accusation, basically saying they cheated to protect the established timeline.
It's a huge accusation of academic misconduct, yes, alleging intentional data manipulation.
Whether that specific accusation is true or not, the claim itself really highlights the intense battle lines drawn around this theory, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It touches on the power dynamics in academia, the resistance to truly radical ideas, and maybe even the human tendency to protect narratives we're invested in. How willing are people to really re-examine fundamental assumptions?
Yeah. And Dendera isn't the only example, right? He redates other Egyptian horoscopes, too.
He does. There's one found on a coffin by an Egyptologist named Henry Brooks Fomenko, redates that horoscope to, believe it or not, November 18th, 1861 AD.
1861, that's practically modern times.
I know. And others found by Flinders Petrie in a place called A3b are redated to May 1516, 1230 AD, and February 9/10, 1268 AD.
And even biblical texts aren't spared.
No. He claims the horoscope described in the Book of Revelation corresponds to October 1st, 1486 AD.
Wow.
And remember the eclipse associated with the crucifixion of Christ, traditionally 33 AD.
Yeah.
Fomenko offers two possible astronomical fits based on his redating of Christ's life, either a lunar eclipse on April 3rd, 1075 AD, or a solar one coinciding with his proposed crucifixion year, 1185 AD. Either way, shifting it by over 1,000 years.
Okay, so eclipses and horoscopes are the big astronomical pillars. But beyond that, what other methods does Fomenko use? You mentioned a whole methodological toolbox.
Right, he doesn't just rely on astronomy. He uses several statistical analysis techniques as well. One of the conceptual simpler ones involves statistical correlation of texts.
Correlation of texts. How does that work?
His basic assumption is that the amount of space dedicated to events in a historical text, number of pages, lines, even letters, should roughly reflect their perceived importance at the time.
Okay, that seems plausible.
So he creates these volume functions by mapping the amount of text dedicated to each year described in a chronicle or history book. Then he compares the shapes of these functions between different historical accounts.
And what does he find?
He claims to find surprisingly high correlations between the volume functions of, for example, ancient Roman history and medieval Roman history. Suggesting that the earlier account is essentially a phantom copy, a duplicate echo of the later medieval account. The pattern of important years is too similar to be coincidental, he argues.
So he's saying, if there's a spike in text volume around, say, 100 BC in Roman history, and a very similar spike around 1300 AD in Holy Roman Empire history, maybe it's the same set of events being described twice.
That's the core idea, yes.
Mm-hmm.
He visualizes these as graphs and claims the overlaps are statistically significant.
That's fascinating. And does he apply a similar statistical approach to ruling dynasties?
He does. It's a similar concept, but applied to rulers. He creates what he calls dynastic survey codes.
Survey codes?
Yes, codes basically quantify shared characteristics between rulers, things like the length of their reign, how they died, significant wars they fought, even family relationships like father succeeded by son.
Okay.
He then compares these coded dynasties across different time periods and even different cultures. And again, he claims to find better than chance correlations between dynasties that traditional history considers completely unrelated and separated by centuries.
Suggesting duplication again. Phantom reflections of the same ruling lineage.
Exactly. He argues these parallels indicate that many ancient dynasties are just copies or misdated versions of later medieval ones.
Where does he get the data for this? Which historical records?
Interestingly, he specifically mentions using Jabler's chronological tables, which were published around 1808-1809.
Why those specific tables?
Because Fomenko believes they represent a clearer, less edited version of the traditional Scullage chronology. Before, as he colorfully puts it, later historians buried the duplications under layers of paint and plaster.
He thinks later historians actively obscured these parallels.
That's part of his broader claim, yes, that the timeline was intentionally manipulated.
And beyond texts and dynasties, any other major tools? You mentioned star catalogs briefly.
Yes, he also applies his astronomical dating methods to things like star catalogs. The most famous example is Ptolemy's Almagest.
The cornerstone of ancient astronomy, usually dated around 150 AD.
Right. Fomenko claims his analysis shows it couldn't have been compiled then. He argues it was actually put together much later, maybe in the 15th or 16th centuries AD, using astronomical observations gathered between the 9th and 16th centuries.
Another massive shift. Okay, so we have these astronomical arguments, statistical arguments. What has been the reaction from the mainstream academic world?
Well, to put it mildly, it has not been positive. The new chronology is, and this is a direct quote often used, universally rejected by mainstream scholars who brand them as pseudoscience.
Universally rejected. That's pretty unequivocal.
It is. The Russian Academy of Sciences, Fomenko's own institution, mind you, and Moscow State University, have held special sessions and even conferences with titles like The Myths of the New Chronology, specifically aimed at critically analyzing and, frankly, denouncing his work.
Wow. And what are the main points of contention? One major one seems to be this idea of deliberate falsification.
Absolutely. Fomenko's claim that Basically, all of world history before about 1600 AD was deliberately falsified for political reasons by Western European historians and humanists in the late 16th and 17th centuries. That's a huge red flag for most historians.
It sounds like a massive conspiracy theory.
That's precisely how critics frame it, and it creates a methodological problem because any document that conflicts with the new chronology can simply be dismissed by Fomenko as a fabrication from this period.
And if there's a lack of documents supporting his theory.
That's attributed to the same conspirators destroying the evidence. It becomes a kind of unfalsifiable loop. If the evidence fits, it's real. If it doesn't, it's fake or destroyed.
Right, that makes it hard to argue against using conventional evidence. And he also rejects standard dating methods used by archaeologists and historians.
Completely. He dismisses pretty much all the standard techniques: archaeological dating, dendrochronology, that's tree ring dating, paleography, studying old handwriting, and especially radiocarbon dating. He labels them all non-exact and contradictory.
What are his specific issues with them? Like dendrochronology seems pretty solid, counting tree rings.
He claims there's an unexplained break in the tree ring sequences around 1000 AD, making longer chronologies unreliable. For radiocarbon dating, he argues it's inherently inaccurate for the period 2000 AD due to various error sources.
Okay.
And he even alleges undue cooperation between radiocarbon labs and historians, essentially accusing labs of tweaking results to fit expected dates, claiming they politely bill for their fiddling and fine-tuning to get the dates to order.
Wow, another accusation of widespread academic fraud.
Yes. And he similarly rejects numismatic dating using coins, arguing it's circular, because coins are often dated based on the traditional chronology he disputes, and pointing to examples where similar coin designs might appear in periods considered very distant.
Okay, so Fomenko dismisses the standard tools. How does mainstream science respond to those specific criticisms? How do they defend methods like radiocarbon or dendrochronology?
Well, they push back hard, obviously. Mainstream science points to these techniques as being robust, rigorously examined, constantly refined, and cross-verified.
Cross-verified how?
Take dendrochronology. Scientists point to independently built tree ring sequences from different parts of the world, like North America and Europe, that match up perfectly and extend back over 12,000 years in some cases, far beyond Fomenko's supposed 1000 AD break.
So, direct evidence contradicting his claim about a break.
Yes. And for radiocarbon dating, they point to the internationally agreed-upon calibration curve, like InCal, which accounts for known fluctuations in atmospheric carbon-14 and allows for dates with relatively small, well-understood error margins. They emphasize the constant testing and blind checks done between labs. The idea of labs routinely fiddling dates to order is seen as frankly absurd and insulting by the scientific community.
Okay. And what about his handling of historical sources and those statistical pattern matching methods?
Critics slam his methods there, too. They accuse Fomenko of being highly selective, with his historical sources basically, cherry-picking data that fits his theory and ignoring mountains of evidence that doesn't.
And the pattern matching, the dynasty correlations.
They argue he forces the data to fit. This involves things like arbitrarily rearranging the order of monarchs in a dynasty, merging separate rulers into one, or simply removing rulers who disrupt the desired pattern, all to create these supposed correlations.
So, manipulating the input data to get the desired statistical output.
That's the criticism, yes. And his statistical text correlation method is described as very rough, failing to account for obvious things like different languages, changing writing styles over centuries, or the simple fact that different cultures might focus on similar themes like wars and successions.
Right. Similar themes don't automatically mean identical events. And what about the astronomical data, which seems like his strongest suit? Is that criticized too?
Oh, definitely. His astronomical analysis is also criticized as being highly selective. Remember Ptolemy's Almagest star catalog?
Yeah, he claimed it was from the 15th, 16th centuries, not 150 AD.
Well, critics like the astronomer Dennis Rawlins argue Fomenko based that claim on arbitrarily selecting 8 stars out of over 1,000 in the catalog, and specifically focusing on one star known to have a large, systematic error in Ptolemy's measurement. They say if you look at the other 1,000-plus stars, their positions overwhelmingly support the traditional ancient dating due to precession.
So ignoring the bulk of the data that contradicts the theory.
That's the accusation. Furthermore, critics point to vast archives of Babylonian astronomical diaries on cuneiform tablets. These contain precise observations of planets and eclipses, and they've been consistently dated using conventional chronology as far back as 600 BC.
Which directly contradicts Fomenko's idea that such observations or accurate dating weren't possible or didn't happen back then.
Exactly. And extensive work by historians of astronomy, like F. Richard Stevenson, who has systematically studied thousands of historical eclipse observations from various cultures, consistently validates the conventional chronology, not Fomenko's.
Okay, so massive academic rejection. But how has this theory been received outside academia? You mentioned his books sold well in Russia.
Extremely well. Over 1 million copies sold in Russia alone. And it did get a boost in public awareness when the chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov endorsed parts of it, particularly the critique of traditional chronology, though apparently he doesn't support Fomenko's whole reconstruction of history.
Interesting. But why the popularity despite the academic rejection? What's the appeal?
Well, that's debated. Some critics, however, see a more concerning angle. They often describe the new chronology as an embarrassment, but also potentially linked to a kind of renewed Russian imperial ideology.
How so?
The argument is that Fomenko's reconstructed history, which posits this vast, powerful Slav-Turk empire he calls the Russian Horde, dominating Eurasia before the 17th century, serves to keep alive an imperial consciousness and secular messianism in Russia. It reframes Russian history as central and dominant in a way that traditional history doesn't.
So potentially tapping into nationalist sentiments.
That's certainly a criticism leveled against its popularity and potential ideological underpinnings.
Okay. So stepping back from all this, where does it leave us? We've taken a really deep dive into the new chronology. It's this theory that radically, drastically redates antiquity based on these mathematical and astronomical arguments.
Yeah, we've looked at its provocative claims, the D-double prime lunar anomaly, the supposed redating of key events like the eclipses in Thucydides, and those stunning new interpretations of ancient horoscopes like Dendera.
But we've also spent significant time exploring the vigorous, often scathing critiques from mainstream historians and scientists. They call it pseudoscience, pseudohistory, and point to what they see as fundamental flaws in the methodology, selective use of evidence, and reliance on circular reasoning and conspiracy theories.
It's a real clash of worldviews, methodology, and interpretation of evidence.
It really is. And this whole deep dive, I think, leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty compelling question. In this age where we're just bombarded with information, where do you draw the line between a genuinely groundbreaking reevaluation of the past and what might be just speculative, perhaps even motivated revisionism?
Yeah, when you're confronted with claims this audacious, claims that challenge everything you thought you knew, what kind of evidence truly convinces you? And maybe more importantly, how do we, as critical thinkers, actually discern verifiable fact from what might be meticulously constructed but ultimately unfounded fiction?
It's definitely a challenge to our collective memory, isn't it? And maybe a stark reminder that history itself isn't just a set of facts carved in stone. It's always a subject of ongoing inquiry, debate, and interpretation.
Absolutely. Something to definitely keep mulling over.